There is this parallel process happening of Zelensky's political stability has been waning and becoming increasingly unstable. Then you have in the collective West, of course, the overall policy toward Ukraine is very, very much unstable. Now, you also have Vladimir Putin, just inaugurated, made a trip to China, lots going on after that trip. What do you see as the next steps for Putin, for Xi Jinping, for the multipolar world as sort of the conflict in Ukraine, as well as the overall world situation, moves in the direction that you just stated, Alexander? I don't know if you want to begin, and then maybe we can get Glenn and Alex in.
I think the key thing to understand is if the Russians win in Ukraine, it is a major step towards multipolarity. It's not going to inaugurate a new system of Russia dominating Europe or anything like that. All of these scare stories that if we have to fight them over there, because if we don't fight them over there, they'll come and we'll have to fight them over here. That is absolute nonsense. The Russians do not want to march to the Rhine or the Atlantic Ocean or take over Finland or Britain or France or any of this. But it will be further decisive confirmation of the waning of American power and of the ending of the unipolar moment. And what the Russians and the Chinese were doing in Beijing is that they were planning the structures that they're going to create on the basis that that is what is going to come. And of course, they're also looking to integrate their economies and to develop things together. They want to build multipolarity. The 8,000-word statement that you mentioned talks about multipolarity, but they also want to build Eurasia up as well. And they have a plan, which is more than our leaders do, by the way.
No, I agree. And I think this is why I also define this war in terms of being about world order. And but just agree with Alexander, this idea that the Russians going to expand into Poland and go for Paris. This is propaganda for the public, but it doesn't mean that this is not a conflict for world order, as the Americans keep saying over and over again. If we can knock out the Russians, focus your resources on China, this is what would restore unipolarity. On the other side of this, if the Russians win it, it will cement a multipolar system. And indeed, I think the multipolarity has already established itself, because over the past 2 years, it was going on for the past 10 years, this really rapid diversification after 2014. But with all the pressure, with all the sanctions blowing up, Nord Stream, all of this pressured not just Russia, but a lot of the other countries in the East to intensify this process of seeking multipolarity in terms of the industries and their supply chains, their technologies. You see this physical transportation corridors, their common banking, de-dollarizing, so using their own currencies, dropping the SWIFT payment system. So across the board, the multipolarity is primarily a geoeconomic construct. Of course, it's a lot of economic competitions end up being expressed more and more militarily once it escalates. But I think this is the direction it will take, and this is why I always argue this was a very foolish war to pursue on behalf of NATO to begin with. I would also, these days, one is often denounced as being a Putinist if you point this out, that this was a silly war. But this was kind of Obama's argument back in 2016 why we shouldn't escalate this conflict, simply because in these kind of wars, logistics matter. This is the core, and Russia is right next to Ukraine. They have all the advantages to escalate all over the West. Again, this was Obama's words. And I would add another element, because on Russia's border, it matters more to them, which is why they're willing to go all the way. This is an existential threat for them. The idea that Crimea should be Russia should replace the Crimea with NATO and American troops and missiles. This is seen as a dagger to the heart of Russia. They could never live with this, so they're willing to go all the way, and they have the logistics and other advantages of proximity. So it was always going to end in failure, and this is, I think, where we're going. And we often see this conflict simply being Russia and the West, but look at the rest of the world. Hardly any countries outside NATO supports these sanctions. And I keep making the point, it's not that they supported Russia's invasion of Ukraine, but nobody wants to go back to the unipolar world. It can be friends of the West. India, they're not anti-Western. It would be very difficult to spin it as such, but still, they also don't want to go back to having, the Washington or London call them and dictate their foreign policy. They also want what the Saudis want, the Turks want, Latin Americans want. They want multipolarity. When they have many trading partners, they don't have too much dependence on any one state or region, so they can come under this economic pressure that will diminish their political autonomy. This is what they want. Medium powers can have more independent foreign policy. This is why the rest of the world is adjusting quickly. It's why BRICS has a line of potential members going around the corner. It's why the world is starting to ditch the dollar. And I think the key crisis, or the key transition to multipolarity, I don't even think it will be Russian victory in Ukraine. I think banking crisis coming to America in the not too distant future. I think these are the things, the economic aspects are what's going to cement this new world order.
Yeah, their obsession, just to go off of what Glenn said, their obsession with Ukraine, I think, is what did them in. The West, I mean, they're obsessed with Ukraine, and even more so than that, obsessed with Putin, obsessed with regime change in Russia. It's an obsession, a sickness, really, and that's what's doing them in. Russia is focused on Ukraine, absolutely. There's the number one on their agenda, but they're not obsessed with it. You can see Putin is going to China. He's thinking big picture. He's thinking long term. They're strategizing. They have a plan. Ukraine is winning in Ukraine is a piece of that plan, is a piece of that puzzle. Not only for Russia, but also for China, because China understands if Russia loses, then China's next. China knows this, which is why China will never let Russia lose. Never. Not going to happen. Because China understands if Russia was to be broken apart in 6 different pieces, like Kaya Kallas was saying the other day, China knows that it's screwed. They know it. So they'll never let it happen. They'll never let it happen. So the whole thing is really it's an interesting case study in seeing how a small group of individuals in the West were so focused and so obsessed with not only Ukraine, but this figure of Putin, which they themselves built up to be this all-powerful, all-knowing entity that's the source of all their problems. They became absolutely obsessed with the regime change of Putin and the breaking up of Russia, that it's led to their whole system collapsing, or at a minimum, their system having competition. At a minimum, their system is going to have a viable competitor, whether it's banking, SWIFT, the SCO, whatever, maybe even the Olympics, maybe even other things. They now have competition. And like Glenn said, and Alexander said, a lot of the world, the majority of the world, kind of likes the new kid on the block. Kind of like what the new system is going to be, and they're going to give it a try. That's bad news if you're the West.
Yeah, no, all very good points. I know that I've kept you guys a little longer than the hour, but I was wondering if you all had time for a brief Patreon question. We're circling all the way back to the Iranian president's tragic death. But you know, in lieu of, and this I think is an example of where people are at. The question is from Valentina asking, what happens if it is found that Mossad was behind the helicopter crash? So I don't know, Alexander, you want to begin?
This would escalate the crisis between Iran and Israel to astonishing levels. I mean, we've just had a massive effort by the great powers and by the Iranian leadership to try to contain the crisis that was caused when Israel attacked the Iranian embassy in Damascus. We saw a missile strike by Iran at Israel, which was, contrary to what a lot of people say, an effort at pulling punches but making points. We saw Israel respond, but again, the United States tried to scale that back. If it turns out that Israel or its intelligence agency have nonetheless gone out and murdered the president of Iran, which, by the way, is an act of war of the most epic dimensions, then I really don't see how this situation could be contained. And we would be moving much further and much faster into an overall crisis in the Middle East, compared to which all the others that we've seen up to now will seem like, you know, sideshows. Now, I don't actually think that. I think, because I think that even the Israelis understand that doing something like this would be altogether too dangerous. I don't think that is what has happened. But of course, if it has, and if it's found out, and if it's proved that it has, well, as I said, I mean, what comes, I just don't even want to contemplate. It doesn't even bear thinking about.
Yeah, anyone else have comments on that question?
No, I did. Well, it did cross my mind when I heard that the president's helicopter was down, because, well, obviously, Israelis, likely with support of Americans, have been behind a lot of assassinations in Iran, and we've had this recent escalations from or provocations by Israel, seemingly with the objective of pulling the United States into a wider war. So, but I think the evidence coming out so far seems, well, so far quite clear that this would have been an accident. And I don't think they would have assassinated the president of Iran. I agree. I don't think anything could contain this anymore, and it would be an absolute horror show. But yeah, so I was very relieved to at least get this first evidence coming that this was an accident.
Yeah. I mean, it is coming not so far after Operation True Promise, which was a pretty big, pretty big and impactful military operation from Iran that definitely angered Israel. But at the same time, I think you guys are exactly on point right now. Not only is there not any evidence to this, but I think if Operation True Promise and also just what's been happening regionally is any testament to it, would be quite, for Israel itself, a very dangerous, very, very, very dangerous step in the direction of a war that I'm not so sure if the world makes it out of it. I'm not so sure Israel can make it out of that kind of conflict. So with that said, though, I know I've kept you guys a while. I don't know if you have any final words, any things you want to promote. I do have your links in the video description with, the Duran, your YouTube channel, Alex and Alexander, and of course, for Glenn, I have your YouTube channel and your book in the video description as well. But any final comments before you guys go?
I just wanted to say thank you for having us on your show again, Danny. And I also wanted to say that Alex is absolutely right about the degree of obsession in the West with the person of Vladimir Putin. Anybody who's dealt with people who are obsessed knows how utterly destructive and self-destructive that is. But one way or the other, that's what the West worked itself up into. And the result is that they're not able to think rationally about their decisions anymore. And that's one of the reasons why we are in the disaster that we are. Surprising that it should have happened in the United States, of all places, given that it was the Americans who provided us with the best novel about obsession, which is, of course, Moby Dick, but there it is.
Yeah, I just want to maybe push back on one thing. In terms of the multipolarity not being good for the West, I think it's bad for Western hegemonic ambitions. But overall, I think it would be positive things, even for the Americans to embrace more a multipolar role, because this would allow it to step back a bit and lick its wounds, because obviously the current role of a global hegemon is not sustainable. There is $34 trillion in the hole, huge economic problems domestically, economic disparity, social problems building up, expressing themselves more in political instability. You're having the rest of the international system increasingly decoupling from the US, trying to balance it to a large extent collectively. So none of this is sustainable, and this is why America's role traditionally has been that of an offshore balancer. It joins wars quite late when everyone else is bled dry, just to impose a new balance of power. Then it withdraw before other countries begin to balance it. Then it builds its strength and holds a distance. This was a good position for the United States, and Britain as well, for that sake. I think this idea of running the whole world, it's overextended the US. It's not in its interest, and which is why I think it would be a good idea for the US to find a way of accommodating or facilitating a multipolar system where it can have a good role in which it wouldn't be balanced by all these other states, that it wouldn't have all its interests defined in zero sum as a hegemon would. So I'm more optimistic if can be a shift of mentality. But for the people who are now residing in the White House, yes, I would very much agree. I think they will overwhelmingly see this as a very negative thing, that the rest of the world is beginning to work more together, reducing their dependence on the US.
I would just want to say I agree with that completely, by the way. Living in the capital of the former imperial power and seeing what empire did here in Britain to Britain, I completely agree with that.
Alex, any final comments, plugs?
No comments. I agree with what Alexander and Glenn said. They'll never do it. They'll never play in the multipolar world, at least not for now. Maybe it'll take 10 years, maybe a generation, like what Lavrov said. Maybe it'll take a generation for them to be part of the multipolar world. But the solution to these problems is actually very simple. These aren't hard. This isn't a hard war to wind down or to get to a solution. Just give Russia the security guarantees. Give Ukraine the security guarantees it wants. Russia gets its security guarantees, and the war winds down. But it won't happen, unfortunately.
Thank you for tuning in to my latest video. I appreciate all of your support. This channel, however, needs your help. I am seeking to make this channel more sustainable in the long term and upgrade necessary equipment to ensure that this work continues onward and makes progress to give you all of the geopolitical analysis that you all deserve. For that reason, I'm asking you to become a member of my Patreon community at patreon.com/DannyDhaiphong. You can find that link in the video description or in the pinned comment below. For whatever amount you choose to give, just know you are supporting independent media that you can't find anywhere else. Thank you so much, and I look forward to the next video.